Hey, it's Kley. Welcome to another video. Today we are going to talk about bright switches or bright caps. If you've ever owned an amplifier that maybe has a bright switch or a bright cap and you've ever wondered what in the world does that mean, today we're going to try to dive into that from a technical perspective and also from a practical perspective, how to use it to its fullest extent and capability. So, bright switches or bright capacitors are really the same thing. A bright switch puts the bright capacitor on a switch, so you can turn it on and off at will, whereas a bright switch is going to be, a bright cap is going to be hardwired into the circuit permanently. For an example, we are using this as the Fender AB763 Deluxe Reverb. That is the Blackface Deluxe Reverb schematic. And if you look right here, you've got the vibrato channel, and this if you look right in here, we actually have the tone stack in this area right here in the middle. And so your tone's going to come in through your input jack, through its first gain stage. It's going to get amplified. It's going to go through these three tone stacks filters. You've got a treble. It's going to filter out some high frequencies, bass on the low end, and then your mid-range here. And then you're going to get to your volume control. So this is where we see our bright capacitor, which is right here, this 47 picofarad capacitor. So first of all, on a very basic level, what a capacitor does is it looks at your signal, and if you want to think of your signal in terms of frequencies, right, you've got low frequencies, bass notes, maybe around 100 to 200 hertz. You've got mid-range frequencies, maybe up to about 1K, and then you've got high frequencies, treble frequencies, that are, maybe 5K and up. So the capacitor will look at that signal, and it will identify the high frequencies at a certain point, and it will filter or select through them differently than the rest of the signal. So the value of the capacitor kind of determines that cutoff point. But, for now, let's just say that maybe it's 5K. So let's clear all our lines out. What is happening here is your signal is coming out of your filter, your tone stack filters, and it comes to this junction point right here. And it's got two paths, right? It can either go down or it can go up. So if it goes down, it goes into our volume control. And this volume control is a variable resistor that's actually set up as a voltage divider. And so what that means is it can go through this path, but it's going to hit a little bit of resistance. And electronic signals do not like to see resistance. They like to take the path of least resistance. So it's going to look, well, what's going on up here? So if I go up instead of down, well, it's going to run into this capacitor. And the capacitor is going to say, well, Mr. Signal, if you are of a high frequency value, I'm going to let you pass straight on through. You can just pass through completely unimpeded or unresisted or untouched if you are of a high frequency value. The rest of you cannot pass and you have to go down. So, what that really means is that if you have this bright capacitor in, the higher frequencies are going to have a really easier time passing through this volume control and going on to the next stage. So the real kicker here is that it really depends on where you set the volume control. Because if the volume control is set very low, like 1 or 2, that means that this wiper is like, actually really it's going to be like way down here. And there's going to be a bunch of resistance in here. So this is a 250, or I'm sorry, a 1 meg pot. So there might be 800 kilo ohms of resistance that the mid and bass frequencies have to go through. So your treble is getting a huge pass to go on past this point. So the treble is going to be greatly increased that the lower that the volume control is going to be set. So your tone is going to be quite a bit brighter if you have the volume set really low compared to if you did not have the bright capacitor. However, if on the other hand, if you actually set your volume control at 10 out of 10, that means that this wiper is actually going to be like up here. So there's basically no resistance that the signal is seeing. So even though this capacitor has said, hey, you treble frequencies, you can pass on through, they're also going to say, well, look, this volume pot is not really impeding none of the bass, none of the mid, none of the treble, so it's all going to pass through. So the more you turn the volume control up, the less impactful the bright cap is going to be. Now, if this were, this is a hardwired bright cap, and the value of the cap is pretty important, right? If you make it a smaller value, then it's going to really only affect the super high frequencies. Whereas if you make it a larger value, it's going to let more of the maybe mid-range frequencies in play. So, you can really, that's one design choice that you can make, is you can maybe mess around with the value of this capacitor to determine how much that is, where that cutoff point is. But then the other side of the equation is if you were to put this on a switch. So all that really does is it just takes this connection point here, right, that you go in the cap, you go out the cap and carry on your way, and it just puts it on a switch. So on one high side of the switch, it's disconnected, and it's just out of the circuit entirely and doesn't do anything. And the other side of the switch, it's in. And that's really about as simple as it gets in terms of making it into a bright switch versus a bright cap. Now, the last thing that I want to mention from a practical perspective is how this impacts pedals, because that's the technical explanation. So from a practical perspective, like I indicated before, having a bright cap or a bright switch really mostly impacts the function of the amp when your volume control is set low. Maybe under, farther than under is going to be most impactful. And so if you're going to be running the amp volume low, it's a good chance that you're probably going to be pairing it with some overdrives to achieve your driven tones. And the reality is that overdrive, by its nature, generates higher harmonics. And what that means is you've got notes that are being stacked upon your initial fundamental pitch, and those notes are higher in frequency. So you actually, whenever you use an overdrive pedal, you more than likely have quite a bit of treble frequencies in your signal that are being generated from those harmonics. And so when you put on an overdrive pedal, it's, you might have your overdrive pedal that sounds really good and really, the way you want it to sound. But then all of a sudden, if you switch the bright cap on, that overdrive pedal is really going to be accentuated in those treble frequencies. And so I would say it's most important to be thoughtful, not just of how your tone sounds with a clean tone with the bright switch, but also how it sounds when you put on an overdrive pedal. Because, it's really just about balancing all of those things together. You may want, if you like to use a lot of overdrive pedals, you may find that putting the bright switch on makes those drive pedals sound really, really harsh. Or maybe you've got an amp that all of the drive pedals you put into it sound really, really harsh. Well, it might be because it has a bright cap that's hard soldered into the amp. And so you might want to consider clipping it out if you want to use those pedals, and maybe just adding some treble back in here, but then it's going to be just a little bit more balanced or a little bit more workable. But on the other hand, if that bright cap has a certain type of sound, and there's really no way to get that same balance of EQ. It's not just that you can turn this treble control up and get the same tone and feel. It really is kind of a unique and different sound. So definitely probably something that I like to have on a switch. If you want my honest personal opinion, I prefer my amps not to have a bright cap, and I like to kind of manipulate my EQ in other ways. But they are certainly a mainstay of all amplifiers, and really something you see all over the place. The very final note that I want to add is that these bright capacitors are basically the exact same concept that you would find in a treble bleed circuit. So if you've got a guitar that has a treble bleed, let's take a look at a treble bleed schematic. Okay, so I've got a treble bleed up here, and if you want to take a look, this is a wiring diagram, but then it also has a schematic here, which is really nice. So you've got your input signal that comes into the first leg of the volume control. Same thing we've got here. Your signals come in to this top first leg of the volume control. At that point, it has either the choice to go towards the wiper or to take the cap. Same thing here. It could either come down to the wiper or it can take the cap. Now this one also adds a resistor, which maybe helps to smooth out the effect of the capacitor. And so basically, if you are familiar with treble bleeds, there's no reason why you couldn't apply some of those same thoughts to your bright cap. And you could add a resistor in series or in parallel, or use any of the fundamentals that you know to work with your treble bleed and use them anytime there's a volume control anywhere in the amp to help it so that as you turn the volume down, it adds a little bit more highs to pass through. So overall, I hope you guys found this helpful and informative. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. If not, I'll see you guys again soon. Thanks. Bye.